The judge laughed, like actually laughed, right after she told him her daughter almost died. She was standing there in cheap sneakers, shaking, clutching a manila folder full of ER charts, and he laughed, said something slick like, "You people always have a crisis when it's time to show up." In a courtroom full of strangers, the woman's voice cracked, not because she was weak, but because the person deciding whether she'd see her child again was smirking. The gallery chuckled too. Two men in the back couldn't even hide it. The bailiff didn't say a word, neither did her own public defender. She stood there alone, humiliated, dismissed, invisible, until the door at the back creaked open. Nobody turned at first. Why would they? But then he stepped in. Navy suit, leather briefcase, government badge clipped to his belt. The judge saw him and froze. Because what nobody in that courtroom knew, not the judge, not the gallery, not even her, was that the man walking in was her brother. And he wasn't here for small talk. He had receipts, and by the time he opened his mouth, everything shifted. The courtroom smelled like burnt coffee, old paper, and cold air that never quite warmed up. You know the kind. That stiff, silent kind of air. Like everyone's waiting for bad news but pretending not to. Monique Ellison stood at the defendant's table, shoes slightly scuffed, hands wrapped around a folder that had seen too many bus rides and too few victories. She wasn't crying loud, just silently. Her cheeks were wet. Her knuckles were white. Her voice, when it worked, was barely holding it together. "Your Honor, I wasn't trying to disrespect the court. My daughter, she has asthma. I had to take her to the ER. She didn't yell, didn't make a scene. She was just hoping that, maybe, someone in this room would treat her like a human being." But Judge Perry Benedict didn't even look up at first. He flipped a paper, slowly, like her words were just elevator music in the background. Then he gave her that look. That look. You know the one. The smirk. The one people in power give when they already made up their mind. "Miss Ellison," he said, all dry and smug, "you people always seem to have a crisis right when it's time to take responsibility." And that was it. The moment the floor dropped out. A few folks in the gallery laughed. Not loud, but loud enough. Even the bailiff shifted, like maybe it was kind of funny after all. Her public defender said nothing. Not even a "Your Honor, that's inappropriate." It was like Monique had already lost, not just the hearing, but her dignity, her agency, her voice. The judge ruled, just like that, supervised visits suspended, until the next review, 6 months from today. 6 months. Monique didn't scream, didn't fight. She just blinked like her body had turned to stone, while her daughter's future was being erased in real time. And the worst part, no one seemed to care. But then, the back door opened, and in walked the man who wasn't supposed to be there. Not after all these years. Not after everything they said to each other. But he walked in anyway. And for the first time all morning, the judge stopped smirking. Monique stared at the bench, eyes glassy. She didn't even notice the man walking in at first, because in her mind, it was already over. Her baby girl, Layla, would spend 6 more months away, all because she chose a hospital over a courtroom. She looked down at her shoes. One had the sole peeling at the back. Suddenly she felt stupid. Stupid for thinking she could walk into this place and be taken seriously. Stupid for wearing Payless flats in a room where power wore polished leather and smiled while ripping mothers apart. She gripped the folder tighter. Inside, Layla's ER report, the prescription slip, the discharge notes. None of it mattered. Because in Judge Benedict's courtroom, receipts didn't matter if you didn't come with a suit. And Monique? She came with faith. Faith that the system would hear her, that maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. She glanced at the gallery. No family, no friends, just strangers waiting for their turn, watching her break. But that's when she felt it. A shift. The silence in the room changed. The court clerk straightened up, the judge blinked, and Monique turned just slightly, eyes landing on the man in the second row. Navy suit, black briefcase, eyes locked on the bench like he was measuring it. And when their eyes met, her breath caught. She knew that face. Julian, her brother. The same one she hadn't spoken to since their mom's funeral, since the shouting match, since he left Toledo behind and never looked back. He wasn't supposed to be here, but he was. And Monique, she didn't know if she should cry or run, because the last time they spoke, it didn't end with hugs. It ended with slammed doors and ugly words. But here he was. No calls, no warning, no promises. just presence. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. She didn't ask him why he came. She didn't have to. Julian Prescott didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. His badge said enough. Assistant U.S. Attorney. Washington, D.C. bar number ending in 4419. That little silver clip on his belt made the judge sit up straighter. The bailiff adjusted his stance. Even the gallery, the ones who laughed, went still. Because now there was someone in the room they couldn't ignore. Julian stood. Calm, unbothered, like he was built for moments like this. Like courtrooms were just another Tuesday. "Excuse me, Your Honor," he said, voice smooth but cutting clear through the air like a cold wind. "I'd like to request representation rights for Miss Ellison." The judge blinked. "I wasn't informed of any new counsel." "You weren't supposed to be," Julian said, casually pulling a folded ID from his coat. "But here I am." He stepped forward, every movement deliberate, laid the ID on the clerk's desk, let the seal catch the light. Then he turned, not to the judge, but to Monique. "Miss Ellison," he said gently, voice softer now, "may I represent you?" The courtroom held its breath. Monique opened her mouth but no sound came out. Tears welled but she blinked them back. "Yes," she whispered. And just like that, the entire courtroom shifted. Judge Benedict leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his posture. But it was too late. The man he humiliated 5 minutes ago, she wasn't standing alone anymore. Julian turned back to the clerk. "I'd like to file a motion to reopen the custody review," he said, "on grounds of procedural misconduct and denial of due process." The judge scoffed. "This is highly irregular." Julian didn't blink. So is publicly mocking a defendant on a hot mic. Gasps, literal gasps. From the gallery, even the court reporter paused, hands hovering above her keys like she couldn't decide whether to transcribe or just watch. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness was heavier than shouting. He laid down a transcript. Highlighted, annotated, everything. "You've ruled against my client 3 times without notifying opposing counsel. You held sidebar conferences off record. And the language used today, would you like me to read it back to you?" The judge said nothing. Because what do you say when someone walks into your courtroom with everything you thought no one would ever see? Julian looked back at Monique. "This is your hearing now," he told her. "You speak. And this time, they listen." Julian Prescott never planned on coming back to Toledo. Not for Thanksgiving, not for birthdays, not even when their mother passed. He left the city like it owed him something and never looked back. Packed his degree, his ambition, and all that quiet childhood rage, and drove it straight to D.C. Because here's the truth. Julian didn't leave because he hated his family. He left because he was tired of fighting battles no one seemed to win. Monique? She stayed. She stayed with Layla, with 2 jobs, with no support. She stayed when their mom got sick. She stayed when the bills piled up. She stayed when the system whispered, "You don't matter," and then proved it. The last time they spoke, it ended with screaming. He accused her of wasting her life. She accused him of abandoning his blood just to sit at white tables in fitted suits. "You think you're better than us," she said. He didn't answer. Because maybe he did. But 3 nights ago something broke. A voicemail. Julian was walking into his apartment, half watching CNN, thinking about a fraud case he'd been working for months, when he saw the notification light blinking. One unheard message. "Julian, it's Monique. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but they're trying to take Layla. I missed court. The judge said some things. I don't know what to do. She didn't cry. That's what got him." She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, empty, like someone who had stopped expecting help. He played it again, and then again. Then he booked a ticket. He didn't text her, didn't call. He just showed up. Because there's a certain kind of silence between siblings that only breaks when something real happens. And this was real. On the plane, he pulled her file. Federal clearance gets you access most people don't even know exists. What he read made his stomach flip. 3 prior hearings. No legal counsel. No notifications of schedule changes. Just Monique, showing up alone, again, and again, and again. And the judge, Perry Benedict? Julian had seen that name before. In an old misconduct claim that got buried so deep, it took a FOIA request to even see the first page. By the time he landed in Toledo, it wasn't about being her brother anymore. It was about calling out a system that only pretended to play fair. one that hid its cruelty behind robes, routines, and bureaucratic rituals, one that had no idea who just walked into the room. The courtroom had started to clear out. Papers shuffled, lawyers whispered, the bailiff glanced at the clock. The judge reached for his gavel, but Julian wasn't done. "Your Honor," he said, standing again. "This isn't over." Judge Benedict narrowed his eyes. "This is not a federal matter, Mr. Prescott." "No," Julian said, cool and steady, "but it's one that just got my full attention. And the thing is," he wasn't bluffing. Julian had already filed the motion. He had transcripts, timeline irregularities, a copy of the judge's exact words, "You people always have a crisis." He placed a printout on the clerk's desk, highlighted, labeled, "This is your voice, Judge, clear as day." The judge leaned back in his chair like something was crawling under his robe. Julian turned to Monique. "I'm not here to save you," he said. "I'm here to stand beside you and make sure you get heard this time." Monique blinked hard. She wasn't used to that, to being backed up, to not having to scream just to be noticed. The judge tried to reassert control. "This court will reconvene after lunch," he muttered. 1:15, "Bring your documentation." Julian nodded once. "See you then." He motioned to Monique and they walked out together. Out in the hallway, the silence between them finally broke. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. "After all this time?" Julian looked at her. "Because you asked." She blinked. You didn't have to," he said. "I heard it anyway. Word got out, not just about the hearing, but about how it went down." By the time court reconvened at 1:15, there were new faces in the gallery. A local reporter in the back row, a law student with a notepad, a woman from the public defender's office who didn't even have a case on the docket, just came to watch. Judge Benedict took the bench, jaw tight, posture straighter than before. But the confidence? Gone. "We're reconvening the matter of Ellison versus Harris," he said, voice flatter now. "Mr. Prescott, you've filed a motion to reopen." Julian stood. "Yes, and I'm submitting supporting documentation. Court transcripts showing unrecorded sidebars, notices not sent to opposing counsel, language used, on record that violates ethical standards, and a request to bring in an independent court officer to review this judge's case history." The courtroom froze. Judge Benedict scoffed. "This court has nothing to hide." Julian didn't miss a beat. "Then you won't mind if we shine some light." A soft gasp rippled through the room. Monique clenched her hands. But when Julian turned to look at her, she nodded. Just once. That was all he needed. In the back, Layla's father, Gregory Harris, leaned in to whisper to his lawyer. Suddenly their side didn't look so sure anymore. The judge tried to pivot. "We'll allow a continuance." "No," Julian cut in, calm, firm, unshakable. "My client has already lost 43 days with her daughter. We request immediate reconsideration of visitation while the investigation proceeds." The judge hesitated. The bailiff stepped in, whispering something behind the bench. For the first time all day, the judge looked rattled. He rubbed his temples, then exhaled sharply. "Temporary visitation reinstated. 2 supervised hours per week. Starting tomorrow." Monique gasped, hand flying to her mouth. She didn't speak, didn't move, just breathed, like she was remembering how again. And Julian? He didn't celebrate, didn't smile. He just placed a hand on her shoulder. The fight wasn't over, but this was the first swing that actually landed. They walked out of that courtroom slowly. No cheers, no cameras, no dramatic music playing in the background, just fluorescent lights, echoey footsteps, and the hum of a vending machine in the hallway. But something had changed. Monique wasn't clutching that manila folder like a life vest anymore. Her shoulders had dropped. Her hands? Steady. Julian stayed close but didn't hover. This wasn't his win, it was hers. He was just there. Finally, they sat in the nearly empty cafeteria. Corner table, microwave spaghetti and 2 bottles of water between them. "I didn't know who else to call," she said quietly, eyes on the table. "You didn't," Julian replied. "You just left a message." She looked up, half smiled. "The same thing, isn't it?" Julian didn't answer, just watched her. The lines under her eyes, the little badge clipped to her scrubs, the wear and tear of someone who's been surviving for so long she forgot what rest feels like. "You shouldn't have been going to court alone," he said. "I know that now," she replied. "But legal aid's a joke. I waited 2 months for a callback, and then they told me the day before my hearing that they were out of capacity." She shrugged. "Layla was sick. I had to choose. And that was the part the judge never understood. The choice. The impossible one? Between showing up in court and showing up in the ER. Between proving herself to a system or keeping her child alive. Monique chose her daughter, and the system punished her for it. But today, for the first time in a long time, she didn't leave empty-handed. Tomorrow, she'd see Layla, even if it was just for 2 hours. And maybe, just maybe, this time the fight wasn't hers alone. Julian didn't wait. That same night, he filed an official judicial conduct complaint with the Ohio Board of Professional Conduct. Attached? Annotated transcripts. Screenshots of missed filings, a buried case from years ago. State versus Kelly Moreno, where Judge Benedict told a young mother, "Your tears won't pay your rent." He pulled that line from the original transcript, word for word. No one had challenged it back then, but now it was back in the light. And light has a way of making roaches scatter. Within a week, reporters from the Toledo Sentinel and the Columbus Dispatch started digging. Public defenders started whispering. 3 of them, anonymously at first, confirmed what Monique already knew. If you didn't walk into that courtroom with a suit beside you, you were just background noise. But not anymore. Monique kept showing up, to supervised visits, to parenting classes, to every check-in they threw at her. She didn't flinch, didn't fold, didn't complain. And during her 3rd visit with Layla, tiny hand in hers, little eyes searching her face, her daughter whispered, "Are we going to be together again soon?" Monique didn't make promises, didn't pretend. She just pulled her daughter close and said, "I'm trying, baby. I'm trying hard." Meanwhile, the courthouse started shifting, quietly. Judge Benedict got a memo from the chief judge. A formal inquiry was underway, temporary suspension pending investigation. He still showed up to work, but the swagger, gone. His court sessions, quieter. Lawyers no longer nodded on cue. Even his clerk hesitated before following orders. Julian didn't rush back to D.C. He took a leave of absence, not just to be with Monique, but to watch this thing all the way through. One morning, sitting in her small apartment, she handed him a cup of reheated coffee. "Why didn't you come home all those years?" she asked. Julian paused, thought about it. "I think I was scared," he said. "Scared to come back to something I couldn't fix." She nodded. "You didn't fix everything," she said, "but you came when it counted. And that was enough." Weeks later, Monique stood outside that same courtroom. But this time, no folder, no panic, no shame. Just her, holding Layla's hand, standing tall. The court had appointed a new judge, Marianne Delacroix, firm but fair. The kind who actually listens. She reviewed every page, gave both sides time to speak, and then looked directly at Monique. "You've faced repeated setbacks in this case, many outside of your control. Today, we're making space to correct that." Monique didn't cry. She stood straight, spoke clearly, and walked out of that courtroom with her daughter's hand still in hers. Not because the system finally worked, but because someone made noise until it couldn't ignore her. Because this wasn't about one case. It was about what happens when power thinks no one's watching, and someone walks in like they already know what time it is. 3 months after Julian first stepped into that courtroom, shared custody was reinstated. Gradual, then unsupervised. Layla was going home, not for a weekend, not for 2 hours. Home. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Monique stood in the sun. She looked different, like someone who remembered who she was before the system tried to break her. "I thought I lost her," she whispered. Julian shook his head. "They just made you think you had no fight left." She smiled. "You showed up," she said. "You didn't owe me anything. But you still came. And maybe that's the part we forget too often. Justice isn't a straight line. It's a maze. A mess of closed doors, quiet dismissals, and systems built to say no with a smile. And sometimes, the only thing that makes it shift is who's watching." Julian didn't come back to be a hero. He came back because his sister asked for help. Not with words, just with truth. And that was enough. So if you're still watching this, if you've ever been dismissed, ignored, or underestimated, remember, you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to be perfect to be worth fighting for, and you don't need a badge to hold people accountable. You just need to speak. Even if your voice shakes, speak anyway. Because someone might be listening, someone who knows the map, someone who walks into a courtroom like they already knew what time it was. If this story moved you, like, comment, share it. Let Monique's story be seen. Because for every courtroom that silences someone, there's a crowd outside waiting to say, "We saw it." And we won't forget,